Welcome back, Netrunner fans, to part 2 of my Salsette Island review. In this part, we're going to be looking at the Corp cards in the pack. The first card we have is a new agenda for HB. This is a 3-for-1 called Personality Profiles. It's a security subtype. Whenever the runner searches his or her stack or installs a card from his or her heap, he or she must trash a card from his or her grip at random. Here's the type of 3-for-1 we don't see a whole lot of. It's a disruptive effect that is designed to stop certain card effects on the runner side. And a huge majority of those card effects that's going to be best against are Shaper cards. So we're talking about SMC, Clone Chip, Scavenge, Artist Colony. There are quite a few of cards that are going to be affected by this random discard. And I really don't think trashing a card at random is going to be strong enough to warrant playing a 3-for-1 agenda. This is the type of effect that would be much more well suited to like a current or maybe an asset. I don't really think that it's going to be worth putting an agenda in your deck for this disruptive effect. I don't think very many decks are playing Chronos Project as like a silver bullet against Shaper. We maybe saw that for a little while. So I certainly don't see a lot of HB decks being willing to include a 3-for-1 like this as a silver bullet against Shaper, especially when they already have Chronos Project and they're not playing that. And the big thing with Chronos Project is that stops Levy AR, and it also stops Same Old Thing, both of which I think are the strongest sort of recursion effects that you would really like to be able to stop with a card like this. So unfortunately, like with most agendas that have some sort of effect, I don't think this is going to be strong enough. It's going to be hard to fit into decks just because it's a 3-for-1, and I don't really think there's a whole lot of incentive to shoehorn it into a deck since we already have an arguably better option that we don't play. Next up is a new asset for HB. This is Jeeves Model Bioroids. It's unique, it's 2 to res, 5 to trash, it's 3 influence. It's Alliance. And that means this card costs 0 influence if you have 6 or more non-Alliance HB cards in your deck. The first time you spend 3 clicks on the same action each turn, gain a click. First, I want to point out the comparison to the Collective. Back when we had the plugged-in tour, we got to pick between either Laramie Fisk or the Collective, and the Collective runner ID had a very, very similar power to this. Well, Fisk won, and now we're seeing this sort of ability re-emerge as a Corp card. Gaining clicks is really good, and this card is going to give us a way to gain a click that's kind of tricky, but there's quite a few ways that we can exploit this. Let's quickly go over how this card works. This is going to trigger whenever a total of 3 clicks are spent on a single type of action. So like if you look at the Corporation's Actions card, that little player aid that came with the game, if you spend 3 total clicks doing a single type of action there, it's going to trigger. So in other words, if you spend a total of 3 clicks playing operations, it's going to trigger. And that includes if one of the operations is a double. Similarly, if we spend 3 clicks purging virus counters, we're going to get the extra click from Jeeves because we spent a total of 3 clicks on a single type of action. Now this also works when we spend a total of 3 clicks activating a single card ability. So like Melange Mining Corp will work with this, but also if we use Mumbad City Hall to tutor up cards 3 times, it's going to work as well. Generally when you gain clicks, the most powerful thing you can do with it on the Corp side is advance agendas or even score them out of hand. And that's why we're going to mainly be looking at operation effects to abuse the fast advance angle of Jeeves. Shipment from Sansan is a really, really awesome card in the pool here. It's going to be a double, so it's going to count as 2 of the 3 clicks we need to meet the condition, and it's going to double advance something at no cost. So if we play this in combination with one other operation, we're going to get an extra click. Now, subliminal messaging or biotic labor are particularly well suited to being that other operation because they themselves give you additional clicks. So with these cards, we can definitely fast score agendas. Like if you go click 1, install an agenda, click 2, subliminal messaging, click 3 and 4, you're going to shipment from Sansan. That'll trigger Jeeves, and then you've got that extra click you need to advance and score your 3 for 2. You can do a similar thing with 4 for 2s with Biotic Labor, since Biotic gives you 2 clicks instead of 1. Mumbad City Hall also seems like another powerful option outside of Fast Advance, because you're going to be able to use it 3 times and trigger Jeeves. Not to mention Jeeves itself is a alliance card, so you're going to be able to tutor it up with the City Hall. I definitely think this card is good enough to see some play. It's got a really powerful effect. It's 5 to trash, so it's going to survive long enough to get that effect off. And it's not even particularly expensive to res. I think this is going to see play mainly in HB because they have the most ways to abuse it with Fast Advance, though it's kind of hard to count out NBN since they're so good at Fast Advance as well. And I could also see something with the Mumbad City Hall just as another powerful tool in a deck like that. Next up, we have a new asset for Jinteki. This is Raman Wray. He's 1 to res, 3 to trash, he's 3 influence, and he's unique. He's Alliance, and he's an executive. The Alliance is, this card costs 0 influence if you have 6 or more non-Alliance Jinteki cards in your deck. Once per turn, you may lose a click when you draw a card. If you do, reveal that card and a card in archives of the same type, then swap those cards. Here's an interesting recursion tool from a faction that doesn't have a whole lot of recursion. And I think this one is going to largely rely on you building your deck around spamming something over and over and over. Now, the best thing that I can come up with to do that with is Mushin Notion. There are a lot of decks that are based around Mushin that would play it basically every turn if they could. They have so much ammo that they can just consistently play Mushin, both with agendas as well as traps and things like Ronin. In a PE style deck like that, you could not only swap around the assets if you needed to get a critical one back, but you could also switch operations like Neural EMP or maybe your economy stuff to get back your Mushins and replay them over and over. This would also make it a lot more permissible for a deck to include 1 or 2 copies of a specific really powerful tool, especially something that costs a lot of influence, maybe like a Sansan City Grid or a Biotic Labor that you wanted to have access to later if it gets trashed or you use it. I like this card quite a bit, and I think the design is pretty interesting and kind of cool. It's very Jinteki, but I'm not sure it's really going to be good enough unless you have a very specific context for it. You lose a click when you use it, which I think really limits its playability. And then the fact that you can only trigger it when you draw a card, which means you're going to have to draw the right type of card at the right time. Now, you could maybe mitigate that somewhat if you played other card draw. Maybe Heritage Committee would help with that. But overall, I think this is going to be tricky enough to use, and it's going to require you to abuse it to even really get a good effect. And unfortunately, I think that's going to leave it out of a large variety of decks. Next up, we have a new piece of ice for Jinteki. This is Opoah Yoga. It's 3 to res, 4 strength, Code Gate Psi, and it's 1 influence. It has 2 subs. The first is play the Psi game. If you win, the runner loses 2 credits. Then the second subroutine is resolve a subroutine on a piece of res Psi ice. The first thing to point out with this is that its second subroutine can just copy the first subroutine. In other words, if you don't have any other res Psi ice, you can just fire the first subroutine twice, and that's going to potentially make the runner lose 4 credits in addition to the cost of the Psi game. So I think that immediately makes this card a little bit more playable than some of the other Psi ice we've seen. A lot of those other ice seemed like they were tailored for Nisei Division, and they weren't really going to be good enough. They weren't going to do what you needed to do outside of that ID. This ice, as a 3 to res 4 strength code gate with 2 subs that potentially affect the runner's credits, I think that's pretty decent just on its own, and it's only going to get better if you have other Psi Ice. Unfortunately, outside of a Nisei Division deck, you're probably not going to have more Psi Ice. Psi Ice are just really not that great. They've generally not been all that strong, and I think that this, while maybe would push you a little bit more towards considering Nisei Division, I think Nisei is moving at too slow of a pace to ever really reach playability. I mean, at this rate that we've been getting cards for the deck, it might be viable sometime in the 2020s. So realistically, I think if this card's going to see play, it's going to be as maybe a 1 or 2 of, just as a large strength code gate with 2 subs. Next up is a new asset for NBN. This is Aria Bot Attack. It's 2 to res, 3 to trash, it's 2 influence, it's ritzy. Whenever there is a successful trace, gain a credit and the runner loses a credit. This seems like an extension of some of the things that we saw in Data and Destiny, which I think is kind of a building on an archetype that from the core set seems like it was intended but has never really been there. And that's the use of lots and lots of trace effects. This thing's obviously going to be the strongest if you're able to initiate tons of traces and win those. Now, the best way to initiate lots of traces is Tracer Ice. And there are a lot of good ones in NBN, so that doesn't seem like a whole lot of restriction. We might also consider using Surveillance Sweep as a way to ensure that we're going to more often win the traces. If the runner has to spend first, that definitely makes it a lot easier to win traces on your ice, and that's going to combo with this really nicely. The other thing to point out is that these stack. So if you have multiple of them in play, it's going to fire twice, and that obviously makes it a lot more powerful. For now, even past Data and Destiny, I don't really see the mass trace thing being good enough. I don't think it's all the way there. But we've certainly seen strides towards making that more and more of a viable strategy, and I think this is another decent card in that mix. Next up, we have a new operation for NBN. This is Salems Hospitality. It's 2 to play, it's 4 influence, it's Alliance, and it's Grey Ops. Alliance is, this card costs 0 influence if you have 6 or more non-Alliance NBN cards in your deck. Name a card. The runner reveals his or her grip and trashes all copies of the named card from his or her grip. Here's NBN's Cabal Therapy, and the first thing I think everyone's thinking of with this is Scorched Earth. I've Had Worse, and just hoarding I've Had Worse is a really effective way at dealing with multiple Scorched. If you get towards the end of the game and you have 2 or 3 I've Had Worse in your hand, that makes you basically impossible to kill with any combination of damage effects. This is going to be a way that you can name I've Had Worse and make them trash all their copies of it. And on top of that, since it's not meat or net damage, they're not going to even get to draw the cards. Now on top of that, this is Alliance for NBN, which is by far the easiest alliance to meet since basically every deck plays 3 Jackson Howards. This to me seems like it's immediately going to slot into a Wayland Scorch deck, and I think it's particularly strong in maybe a Gagarin mass asset deck, because you can tutor it up with Mumbad City Hall. That's going to mean that you only need to play 1 of these, maybe 2, you'll be able to tutor it up at the right time, deal with I've Had Worse, and then set up for like an SEA Scorched kill. I definitely expect this to see some play, both in the context that I just described, but also maybe in the future if we see more revealing the runner's grip-oriented stuff out of NBN. Next up, we have a new asset for Wayland. This is Executive Search Firm. It's 0 to res, 3 to trash, it's 3 influence. It's Alliance, and it's ritzy. Alliance is, this card costs 0 influence if you have 6 or more non-Alliance Wayland cards in your deck. Then it has Click, search R&D for an Executive, SysOp, or character. Reveal it and add it to HQ, shuffle R&D. This is pretty obviously limited by which cards you can tutor up. I think by far one of your best choices is Jackson Howard. Now within Wayland, we also have Elizabeth Mills. That's a pretty good silver bullet type card that you would want to tutor up with this. But after those few, you're really starting to run out of choices. And I think that this is the type of card where the card pool is going to have to expand for this to really be something you want to consider. As it is, if you just need a one-shot tutor for a specific asset, you could play either Executive Boot Camp or Tech Startup, both of which I think are better. This is going to be a lot more apt at getting multiple things, tutoring over and over and just getting a bunch of different things in play. And right now, the only thing you can really do with that is maybe Jackson Howard. I could maybe see this as something that you would get with your Mumbad City Hall, and then that would let you tutor up different cards that you wouldn't normally be able to get because you'd have a different tutoring effect. But as it is, outside of that, I really think this is going to stay in the box till we get more cards of these subtypes. Next up is another asset for Wayland. This is Indian Union Stock Exchange. It's 1 to res, 3 to trash, it's 2 influence. Whenever you res or play an out-of-faction card, including itself, gain a credit. It's pretty hard to get me excited about a Wayland asset that makes credits. I don't know if you've ever seen a card like that before. But this one I think has a really cool and interesting way that it gets you those credits. It's important to point out that out of faction includes neutral cards. So with the Mumbad City Hall package, with the Mumba Temple and Museum of History, those are going to be 6 copies of things that you can easily tutor and res that are going to be considered out of faction. Same thing's going to go for all neutral cards, and that's going to include ice. So if you're resing neutral ice, you're going to get credits for that. That's pretty sweet. This is another candidate for pushing the mass asset style into Wayland, especially after the Commercial Bankers Union that we saw last pack review, and this. We're going to have a really, really strong economic foundation for a deck like that, and since you can also tutor up the Mumba temples, you're going to have ways to res stuff. I think Gagarin is increasingly looking like a good alternative to Industrial Genomics for that style of deck. Next up, we have a neutral piece of ice. This is Cobra. It's 0 influence, 4 to res. It's 1 strength Sentry, Destroyer, AP. It has 2 subroutines. The first is Trash a Program. The second is do 2 net damage. This card has got me pretty excited, mainly because it continues improved designs on neutral ice. We saw with Assassin, I think, a big shift in the way that neutral ice are designed. That was just a really powerful, decent, high-end ice that works in almost any deck. And this is a mid-range ice that I think is kind of the same thing, where it's going to work in virtually any deck, and it's just all around pretty solid. This certainly has a favorable comparison to some other ice at approximately the same cost. This is going to do a more punishing face check to a runner than something like Roto Turret, and it's also got 1 strength, so it's not going to insta-die to Clone Chip Parasite. I really like this. I definitely expect it to see play as a 1 or 2 of in a wide range of decks, and I think this is really filling a gap in the card pool that we could really use some more ice for. Next up, we have a neutral operation. This is Localized Product Line. It's 4 to play, it's 3 influence. Search R&D for any number of copies of a card, reveal them, and add them to HQ, shuffle R&D. Well, this certainly seems really powerful, but man, 3 influence, and it costs 4? I really can't come up with anything particularly great to do with this. This to me seems like a card that's probably going to make more sense in the future. It's almost certainly going to involve some sort of combo, Or maybe in the future, if we see Corp cards that are limit greater than 3 per deck, this could be pretty good. Like if there was a consumer grade type effect on the Corp side of the game, I could see playing this because you'd be able to tutor up like 6 cards or whatever. But as it is, the best thing that I can come up with is like Scorched or something like that. And I think it's already easy enough to assemble that without playing a 3 influence cost, 4 cost operation. This is a card to watch for in the future because the effect is just undeniably so strong. But I think for now, this is probably going to sit in the box. The last card in the pack is a neutral upgrade. This is Mumbad Virtual Tour. It's 0 to res, 5 to trash, and it's 2 influence. It has Alliance. This card costs 0 influence if you have 7 or more assets in your deck. If the runner accesses Mumbad Virtual Tour while it's installed, he or she must trash it if able. Well, I don't know if anybody's seen any decks lately that have 7 or more assets in them, but I've seen quite a few of those floating around. And this thing seems like a pretty natural addition as a no influence cost card in decks like the Industrial Genomics thing. Now, there are, I think, a few reasons why you're not going to just immediately include 3 of this. The first point is that this only works while it's installed. So if they access it off of R&D or out of HQ or out of archives, that's not installed, so it doesn't work. Second is that if they don't have enough credits, they don't have to trash it. In other words, if you've pumped up the trash cost of stuff sky high with your genomics ability and they access this thing, unless they're super rich, it's just not going to do anything. It's worth noting that they would also have to spend like wizard credits or maybe like an imp counter if they access this thing. But I think if you're looking for a solution to imp, Cyberdeck's Virus Suite is just way better, and I think is just generally going to be a better card to play. And so while I think that this thing has a lot of potential in the genomics Gagarin styles, I think there's already so many great cards for that deck that this is at the edge of what would be playable. It seems to me that the biggest thing with this is just going to be that it works when it hits them. And I think that it's so conditional that that's going to be hard to do, especially in genomics. I could see this actually being really good in a like PE shell game style because they're going to want to check unadvanced remotes. And this would be a perfect card to have them, they build up credits and then they're checking your remotes and they run into this stupid thing and have to deal with it. That's going to do it for my Salsette Island review. This pack is pretty spotty. I think it's got a lot of cool and interesting cards, but a lot of the best cards are only going to work in specific contexts, and I think that there's even quite a few other cards that are just waiting to emerge as playable. This is a good development, a good effort into the Mumbad cycle. I think we've seen a lot of really mature and interesting designs this cycle, but like I said, I think you're going to have a really good reason why you want to pick this up. And luckily this pack offers quite a few of those. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and click the button that looks like a thumbs up. And leave me a comment letting me know which cards I'm right or wrong about. I'll see you soon for some more Netrunner stuff.